Thank you all for coming. It's great to see everyone here. For those of you who I have not met, I'm Megan Doherty, the new director of the Museum of the White Mountains. So thank you all for turning up for this first event that has been entirely mine and the planning and wasn't sort of on the books before I came. This is decidedly not entirely my event. But this is the first event that was sort of started and come to fruition since I've been here. So it's great to see so many of you turn out, both here and on Zoom. And before we sort of dive into our program for today, I want to take a minute to acknowledge that the land that the Museum of the White Mountains is on is land that was originally sort of unceded territories of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples. And I think particularly in the context of talking about climate and justice, it's important for us to think about the groups who were stewards of this land for millennia before colonists came and settled this area and named it Plymouth and named it New Hampshire and named every inch of it whatever they saw fit. So I think there's a lot we can learn from our Indigenous communities as we think about what it means to be stewards of this land in the face of climate change. So as we think about that, I'm so excited to have had the help of Amy Villamagna, Jack, whose last name I can't remember right this second, so I apologize. Kuchar, thank you. I had this whole thing I was going to practice this morning, and instead we moved furniture for an hour. So Jack and Miles and Autumn and Ellie, who will be here later today, were all really instrumental in planning this event, helping to shape the topics we're talking about today, and as well as you'll hear over the course of the day, participating and sharing their thoughts with us. And this map that you're looking at is just to kind of help us think about how sometimes in central New Hampshire, we can feel isolated and sort of far from everything. But today we really are we literally are part of something larger than ourselves. So all of the dots on this map are institutions, organizations, schools, faith groups, K through 12 schools, higher ed schools, a whole range of groups that have said, yes, we are talking about this today, right? We are participating in this climate and justice teach-in. That's sort of an initiative that was started at Bard College. And the last time I looked at their statistics, it was over 300 institutions in 50 countries. So we're not alone in being concerned about this, and we are not alone in thinking about solutions. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to our speakers today. The plan is that each of them will speak for 5 minutes. I'm going to be sitting over there with a timer and have a bright orange sign. We really want this to be sort of put some ideas on the table and then have lots of time for conversation and discussion. I'm going to get out from in front of me. And I think we'll have you start. And you want to we won't do big introductions, just sort of your name, maybe your department, and take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Kelsey. I'm a professor in meteorology, just across the street in Boyd Hall. Should I take it away, or do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And I've long had a passion for not only the weather, but the climate and our environment as well. And it is so great to see so many of you here today, because tackling this big crisis takes all of us together. And so the important first start is just to get educated on the topic, and then we can take that, move forward, and implement solutions. So thank you, all of you, for being here today. I'm going to talk to you briefly, again for 5 minutes, about what's going on with climate change here locally and how that's impacting recreation in the White Mountains region where we live. So climate change is happening. It always has happened before humans existed, and it continues to happen. But what's different today is that a one single species on this earth is causing the climate to change in a very, very big way. And we are changing it so fast that we haven't seen this rate of warming of the global climate since the coming out of the last glacial period about 12,000 years ago. We are not only increasing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to cause the globe to warm, but we are also vastly changing the land, right? We are paving it, we're building on it, we are burning it. It is undergoing huge changes, and all of that rolls into causing the climate to change in so many various ways. There is a big lag between our outputting of greenhouse gases or our paving over of forests and the response of the climate system. Some like to say it's on the order of 30 years. You can think of it as you're heating up a pot of water, and that's us heating up the atmosphere. If we were to stop polluting and burning forests and whatnot right now and turn off that burner, it's going to take a long time for that pot of water to cool back to what it was before. So even if tomorrow we stop polluting, there's still probably a few decades of warming and changes until the Earth hits a new equilibrium. However, the sooner we can change that, turn down our impact, the sooner we can restore a new equilibrium to the Earth and mitigate the biggest problems for ourselves and our ecosystems. All right, more locally here in the White Mountains, all seasons are warming, especially the winter. We're seeing more rain in the winter, and this was a great example of what we are going to see more of in the future this past winter. We're going to see lower snow depth, like we saw this winter, for example. Less snow cover. We saw the snow melt out very early this year, which is, again, something we're going to see more of. The number of good snow days, like if you like skiing, like my colleagues do, if you like snowshoeing, ice skating, those good quality weather and snow days are declining because we're seeing more rain events punching holes into our winter, and we're seeing more big warm-up events, causing the snow to melt and refreeze and get icy, and it's terrible to ski on. Same thing with snowmobiling as well. You need a good thick snow depth in order to snowmobile. And a smaller, thinner snow depth also causes the soil to freeze more. It seems sort of counterintuitive, but in a warming climate with thinner snowpack to insulate the soil can freeze. And so that's actually hurting our sugar maple trees, which we know and love, and that provide us with that sap to produce our maple syrup. And it's also hurting our fall foliage as those trees are more damaged, the roots freezing in the wintertime. We are seeing them decline and more oak and pine move in to our forests here. During the summer, we're seeing more extreme heat events, which of course is terrible for people's health. And it's pushing more and more people to the lakes and the rivers and the mountains. We're seeing more drought and also at the same time, more extreme precipitation events. We're seeing more dry time in between those big precipitation events. So that is causing irregularity in our water supply. And because of all this, and effects like this in different ways across the country, we're actually starting to see what we call climate refugees, people moving out of the West, where it's really, really dry right now. And New England is a great place to go, because even in a changing climate, there will be plenty of water, still a moderate climate, and there's a lot of family connections for people out west back here. So that's going to increase first and second homes. It's also going to lead to more people recreating, just as the pandemic pushed more people to recreate outside in the whites. We're going to see more population from those climate refugees, probably pushing that further, increasing erosion, flooding from heavy rain events, damage to infrastructure, and probably decreasing water quality unless we get on top of this issue now as more people recreate in the relatively pristine lakes and rivers and mountains that we have now. So those are a lot of the sort of domino effects of climate change that we will see, and Amy and Elliot and Jack will continue that progression, that dialogue. So thank you.
Is Len on? Len Reitsma, if you are there, you are welcome to speak right now.
I think no.
No? All right. And I get to cover 2. Does that mean I get 10 minutes? No, I'm just
No.
kidding. I won't do that. We will equally, it's about justice, so we will equally distribute the extra minutes amongst everybody. So I'm Amy Villamagna. I'm a professor in environmental science and policy, also with the Center for the Environment. And really what I wanted to share with you today was how climate change is impacting our ecosystems and our biodiversity in New Hampshire right now, particularly in the White. So Eric provided an incredible foundation to all of sort of the mechanistic changes that we're expecting to happen. Increase in precipitation during the winter, sometimes decrease of precipitation in the summers. Overall, less predictability, less sort of solid state weather as we think of it, right? Like our climate becomes a little bit more erratic. What that means from a biodiversity perspective, which are the fundamental units of all of nature and everything you see around you, is that species that have been here over a long period of evolutionary time, they are adapted to the current climate. Often, or a lot of our species that we see in this region are what we refer to as cold adapted species. I do a lot of research on brook trout. That is a great example of a cold adapted species. As that species starts to encounter a shift in climate, it pretty much has, like 2 things it can do. Well, 3. 1, it could move. 2, it could die. Or 3, it could hold on long enough so that maybe evolution will occur over multiple generations, right? One of the issues that Eric already mentioned is that climate change is happening at an unprecedented rate, faster than most species can evolve to adapt. Every species has sort of its fundamental or pre-described range of tolerances. Once you push back those tolerances, then you start to see stress, and stress will inevitably affect reproduction, which decreases our populations of our species. As you start to see any given species decrease, that means that the composition of the species that you're seeing around you will decrease. Eric already gave a great example about shifts in our forest. Those are very easy to see changes that are occurring at sort of that fundamental biodiversity level as we start to see a decrease in some of our hardwoods and an increase towards a pine ecosystem. Dramatically influences all the other species that depend on those habitats as well. So a species could also move, right? Some species have the opportunity to move. So a lot of what we're seeing with climate change is not just climate change in and of itself, but it's how climate change is really intersecting or interacting with other forces that exist, that have already pre-existed. So for example, land use, right? The development that is not just in New Hampshire, obviously, but across the globe is fragmenting our landscape, which makes it harder for species to move naturally, right? It's harder for a brook trout, for example, to cross a road. They have to go through culverts. Many of the culverts, which are just these pipes that convey water underneath the roads, you encounter them more times than you'll ever acknowledge. Many of them have been sized for a climate that we are no longer in, which means the water that comes down through precipitation or through snow events or rain on snow events, that water has to go somewhere. It goes into our small creeks, right? When we start to see more rain on snow and more very high intensity rainfall, those conveyances for stormwater get overburdened and they start to overwhelm the culverts that exist. Though that infrastructure then poses barriers to movement of aquatic species. Same way that our roads, our large transportation corridors, our development footprint, like where our houses are, where our companies are and our businesses are, all that impervious surface, that also prevents terrestrial species, so land-loving species, from moving to get from one place to the other. So some of the biggest challenges with respect to climate adaptation from a biodiversity and a nature perspective is that humans have set up other hurdles that even outside of adding climate change is sort of this big problem, it was going to be problematic to begin with, right? So a lot of what we see here is this idea that everything's changing all at once, and trying to untangle that problem can be really complex. But ultimately what comes down to it is the same that's always been, is sort of maintaining a good connection with nature, making sure that we are allowing species to do what they need to do to persist while also, fighting the climate change issue on all other fronts, but making sure that we're conserving and protecting enough so that they do also have this other option, which is to adapt and to move as we go through.
Got someone on Zoom, since you're like four tiny heads that all say Megan Doherty. Someone at Zoom had asked if we could have name plaques. So we've got those. There are some chairs and there's a nice little settee over there if you want to come and have a seat. All right.
Jack, I think you're up. Okay, hi, my name is Jack Kutcher. I'm an environmental science major and I'm a junior at Plymouth right now. A few of you might know me, but I'm just going to talk about what I've kind of seen with climate change. I don't know if you know, but I'm a pretty passionate snowboarder and I actually work at Waterville Valley. I'm a lift attendant. And just working there, I've kind of begun to see some of the things that our generation is going to end up facing firsthand. And one of those things is just going to be shorter seasons. Every season, we're opening later, and it's a clear red flag that there's not enough snow when the snowmakers are riding around on ATVs instead of snowmobiles at the beginning of the season. And just seeing that and how the seasons are starting later and they're ending earlier every season. In addition to that, to keep a lot of snow on the mountain, a lot more work has to be done. You're going to have to pay more people. I don't know if you guys have seen lift ticket prices, but at Waterville, I'm pretty sure it's $102 at the window for a lift ticket, which is a lot more expensive than it was even when I was going to the mountain in high school. There's a lot more rain events. So, instead of getting big snow days and big powder days, which everyone loves up here, because why else would you come to Plymouth? But instead of getting those big powder days and big snow events, you're going to be getting a lot more rain events. And that's not only going to make conditions worse, you're going to have people like groomers, snowmakers work harder. It's going to be harder labor, and that's also going to cost more money for the resorts. Same thing with tickets. Food is also a lot more expensive at resorts. If you're going to buy food for your whole family for lunch, it shouldn't be a surprise if you're going to be dropping $80 on something like, chicken fingers, fries, pizza for the kids, and a couple of drinks. So the reason I'm kind of up here and talking about this is just because seeing all this stuff, it's kind of made me realize that unfortunately, it's looking like that it's going to be our generation that's going to be the one that's going to have to deal with this problems. And rather than just accepting how the way things are now, I think we kind of need to just think about how accepting the way that things are going to be in the future. And just realizing a lot of my passions are about the outdoors, like hiking and stuff and snowboarding and all those things. No one wants to hike in mud season, number one. And number two, no one wants to go snowboarding. And how can you if there's no snow? So I was just kind of like, if I want to have all my passions continue throughout my whole lifetime, and maybe for my children or my grandchildren or other younger generations of my family to be able to enjoy the same passions that I did growing up, I might have to make some changes in my life. And so might this whole generation as well.
Is Len coming, or do you want me to go ahead?
We don't think Len is coming. So.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jack. My name is Elliot Bruno. I'm a professor in the English department here at Plymouth State University. And I wanted to talk a little bit along with my colleagues in the ski composition class who are all here about a little bit about what we do here in Plymouth in terms of writing. We've begun integrating experiential education. So we have some sections that ski, some sections that paddleboard, do hiking, do climbing, kiting, other outdoor activities where students and the faculty are really getting out there in the environment. As Jack said, it's a wonderful place to get out and do stuff. But we're noticing some evidence of climate change. And we've been involved in outdoor activities at Plymouth for the history of the university. I wanted to point to one aspect of that, and that is kind of the history, in particular, the history of skiing. And one of our faculty colleagues, an emeritus colleague now, John Allen, has written a series of books, and he's an internationally renowned author on skiing. This is his book on it's a historical dictionary of skiing. And these are available in Lamson Library, as Gary McCool here knows very well. our emeritus librarian who's here. But what I worry about in looking at John's book and the history of skiing is that there's going to be no more history of skiing if this keeps up. About 70 years ago, 2 towns over from here, my father looked at the backside of a hill. It was called Red Hill. It's in Moulton Borough. And he thought, along with my uncles and the rest of the volunteer fire department, that it would be great to start a ski area. So they took 20 acres, they cut down the trees, kept the poles for supporting the rope tow that they were going to construct. They winched a pickup truck to the top of the hill. It was about 400-foot vertical drop. They got a rope, they put up the poles, they tacked wheel hubs to the top of the poles so the rope tow would have something to return on. And they started a ski area. And it was a great community place. We would go there to ski every day. Lift tickets were 25 cents. Hot dogs were a dime, hot chocolate 5 cents. And the community would gather and we'd go there, and there was none of the high prices that Jack talks about. We didn't have chicken fingers, but we did okay with hot dogs and hot chocolate. That was a wonderful place. And it's a fixture of my childhood. It's where I started skiing. Those days are gone. Every town almost in New Hampshire had a ski area like that. And those places don't exist anymore, unfortunately. And I don't want to downplay the existential problems with climate change. People are going to lose their lives, their homes, their habitats, their food sources. It's going to be dire in many places. So in talking about skiing, I feel a little frivolous, but I want to underscore that it's just a symptom. It's a harbinger of what's to come. And I think if we continue to lose the environment that we're accustomed to, it's not only going to be all the trees and the habitat and the animals and the flora and fauna that we lose, it's going to be much more. I have a farm not too far from here, and I just spent a couple of years cutting down all of the white ash trees on my farm, some of them almost 150 years old. They were killed and are being killed by the emerald ash borer, which is just one of a host of insect pests, invasive pests that are drastically changing our environment. These are kind of the, thank you. I got a 1-minute warning over here. I think I'm the first one to get the 1-minute warning, so I'll wrap it up. I think everybody in our ski class that skied with us this winter had a great experience. We were able to ski every class day, and that was remarkable. But that's not going to continue. And we can't afford, speaking of what Jack does up on Waterville, we can't afford to be spending an awful lot of money to pump water, freeze it, and put it on the ground just so we have some fun. I don't know if that's sustainable. So unless we do something about the climate, our way of life, how we enjoy our world is going to drastically change, as Jack said, for your generation.
Thanks, everyone. So we're hoping now to have some conversation. If you have questions for our speakers or questions or sort of comments that you want to add, we would love to hear from folks. And also for those of you who, I think that mic is pretty good. I'm hoping that people on Zoom can, it's picking up it's attempting to transcribe my editing as I talk while I watch the words. So it must be working. So those of you who are on Zoom, if you want to, feel free to unmute and turn your video on if you want to ask a question or make a comment, or put them in the chat and we can read them out.
So one thing that briefly was mentioned was around the idea of climate refugees and being a very prime area to receive a lot of those. I was curious if anyone would knows if there are any state legislation or plans in place that states or federal government or towns are imposing for planning those kinds of situations, whether it's also like Maine, Vermont, and upstate New York, and those areas. Because I know that we saw that during COVID, especially during climate related, but we saw that influx of people living in the area, like Waterville dealt with that a lot. So I was just curious if that's a thing that's even been talked about at the state level.
Can we defer?
Yeah,
And I think Dr. Ruhm is speaking in the next session, right?
yeah.
Yeah, so,
But I just want to touch on, of course, bring that from refugees to the picture. I don't see that happening, the climate, dealing with climate refugees at the local level, but globally, it is going to be a major issue. We are talking about maybe by 2050, 1 billion climate refugees. So, but do we care if it is happening somewhere far, far away from us? And how do we get that? And how do we prepare ourselves right now? And I'm going to be talking about, or maybe mumbling a lot, when I bring political science to the picture. Our concern is we still so much focusing on mitigating. And I think climate refugees question is all about how do we adapt to it. Adaptation, we need to start focusing on equally, if not more. And I apologize if you talked about it, I just walked in and it is redundant, sorry, but that I'm not.
yeah.
When did your father like skier? Like what was like sort of like history? I just thought that's just like super interesting. Like your father started skier. That's like
It is really cool. And there's still a sign and the area is actually still there, but it doesn't operate much because we don't have enough snow. And it's called Red Hill. And if you go over to Moultonborough, you can find it. There is a fire tower on the top of the main hill, and Red Hill is on the back or the north side on the lower part. Red Hill is much bigger. It doesn't go all the way up to the top. It's just a small part, which they basically cleared at the time with axes. The chainsaw hadn't really come into general use at the time.
Gabe, and then Ivy.
How can I, as a consumer and as a college student, make a meaningful impact in the person change?
Show up to every climate teach-in that's ever held at Plymouth State University. No, so I could take a stab at that. I would say and one of the inspirations of this event was really just about bringing awareness and the conversation to the foreground. So there's, activities that you can do that curb your carbon footprint. And honestly, students of mine know that I will just say, Google it, right? Like, because it's to the point now where if you just say, Google how to change my carbon footprint, you can get tons of activities. But to me, after seeing those are practices. And those of you guys have had me as a professor, I oftentimes pose the question, like, is it an ethic or is it a practice, right? And really what we need is this paradigm shift from practice to ethic. And so engagement, bringing the conversation to the foreground, making it socially acceptable to talk about it, making it socially acceptable to be passionate about it and to make action towards it, I think is, for me, at least personally, where every single person in this room can chip away and have a massive impact. Because like all trendsetters, that's how things change, right? One person does something, the other person follows them, somebody else agrees. Next thing you know, everybody is wearing Uggs in the middle of summer and it's raining, right? Like we see these trend-setting things, and that happens from just being part of it, right? You see that with all social movements. It's just being part of something bigger than yourself. And so to me, aside from the, carpool, don't fly as much, look at who you're purchasing things from, those kind of, activities, it really is just about engagement. Miles, did you want to follow up with that?
Yeah, this is what I'll be discussing, but that's in the second part. I'll say something briefly now. And the way that I will frame it, the way that I think you should frame it in your head is to do what you're able to do first. So don't feel guilty that you can't do something. Instead, focus on what it is you're able to do. There are going to be other times in your life where you're going to be able to do different things. You might have more money later, so you can get a more efficient car, whatever the thing is. But start with the things that are going to have the highest rippling effect. So if you feel comfortable being involved in politics, if we can get legislation about these things, then that's just changing the rules, right? And if you think about it, if we change the rules of everything, if nobody can emit carbon, it just becomes illegal tomorrow, then our problem's closer to being solved than ever might be. Of course, that's not the best solution, but if you show your representatives that you know about these issues and that you care about these issues, then they're more likely to address them. And that goes on all scales from, like your state representatives all the way down to community. And then after that, focusing on things that happen every day. So you might take that plane trip to see something across the country, but it's really what you do every single day of the year that's going to have the bigger impact. And so if you're part of a big company and none of the rooms have lights that turn off when nobody's in there, like they don't have sensors, if you can convince the person that that's something you can do, there's a great way to save a lot of electricity. When you leave that company, they're not going to go away. Same thing goes for your personal life. But in the background, efficiency stuff is the easiest to tackle, and it's also going to make a huge difference.
If I could just add to that little four-letter word, vote. And looking out at this audience, my generation votes a lot. You don't vote enough. And I know they've made it harder for you to vote, but that's probably one of the most important single acts you can do to change what goes on in our state, our county, our country, the world.
To build off that, I just want to sort of echo and build off of both of your comments there. As Miles said, do what you can, right? We live in a rural region with no public transportation, so don't feel like you have to apologize or feel bad about driving a car around, right? That's just something we can't fix right now. And that's okay, but change those other ways, right? And be an example. In addition to voting, as much as you feel comfortable and able to, push yourself to write letters or speak to our representatives, right? They need to hear it from us. The loudest voice, usually gets the attention. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, it's that sort of thing. So the more voices that are speaking to our legislatures, our representatives, and the more things will change, because they are beholden to us ultimately, and they will listen to us. So we just need to speak loudly and in great numbers. So do what you can there.
That goes for you as a student body too,
Yeah.
right? Our community is at many different scales. And so if that overwhelms you, thinking about that, start here. There's still a lot that can change here. And come back at 2:30, right? To talk more about that part. Ivy, did you want to?
Well, before we go to I just want to read out two comments that I think are on this thread. We'll come back to the question after Ivy's question, but one comment from Susan Skinner says, in Camden, a group of us proposed the creation of a group to create a climate adaptation report for the town. It passed, we wrote it, and we're having an impact on local planning, right? So thinking about how you can take action at a local level and really see results. And then Diana Joel says, except also consider running for office. So I think that Miles said that, but there's another echoing in all caps with some exclamation points of you yourselves taking the initiative, running for office, right? Like we can vote for you just as well as we can vote for people who might be more of our demographics, right? So go ahead and run. See, look at she's gonna vote for you. There you go. Okay, Ivy, go ahead.
So
just like the idea of like a climate refugee, it kind of seems a bit vague to me, considering like right now we're living in a time where like gentrification and like people are moving into our small towns. And like rich developers are buying out like historic buildings all over New Hampshire. So how is our state going to like adapt to both gentrification with also this like influx of climate refugees without kicking out people who have like lived here their whole lives and have like roots here?
Do you want to? Hi. Do you want to talk about that now, or do you want to talk about it later?
It would be easier for the
Yeah.
online, so if it was talked about while she was up here.
Why don't we
right?
flip? Do we want to?
Yes. Maybe
Whenever.
this is a good.
I would say pause it and table it until
Yeah.
whenever
Yes.
We'll
we
get.
get up there.
Yes.
I'll give you your 1 minute warning late. We'll credit you a minute for later. How about that? So we will, this is, Dr. Ruhm is in our next panel, and so she's gonna talk more about climate refugees, so I think we're gonna come back to that when she can be in front of the camera. Is that okay? So we're not, anyway, not gonna answer that. Okay.
And I think that's parcel of income inequality. We're seeing that particularly in our state, gentrification, absolutely. I mean, my hometown here is 80% summer homes. And everybody else takes care of their toilets and their bedrooms and their lawns. It's kind of awful in that way. I don't know how much that's linked to climate change, but I know it is in many ways.
Well, you can link it, I mean, if you're even thinking about the increase in just vacation homes, right? Cities are becoming more uncomfortable in the summer. And so people looking for summer homes with greater affluence are able to purchase more. Their purchasing power in New Hampshire is higher, right? So even just that demographic, even if we don't think of that as climate change, that again is at that intersection of urbanization, impervious surface, land use change, and climate. So sometimes it's hard to tease it apart, but they're two, forces working together that's going to push people out of cities when they have the opportunity to go for vacation and leisure.
And to build on that, right, a lot of these folks moving up here are used to living in a town or city that has a sewage treatment plant and other services, right? And so they're going to bring their habits, right, of maybe lawn mowing and fertilizing up here. And if they live in Moulton Borough, they're probably going to apply those same practices there when hiring contractors to do the work. And unfortunately, a lot of those nutrients will flow out into the lakes, which are warm water plus nutrients is a bad combination for bacterial and algal blooms, right? That are detrimental to water quality and the health of the aquatic ecosystems.
Right, we focus a lot on winter, but summer is dodgy too with climate change, between drought and water quality issues in particular. And all of that, you can talk about any of the environmental impacts, then you think about the environmental services that we get and how that affects people and business and tourism, and then the indirect feedback loops of how that everything, which is what the rest of our sessions will also tackle.
The frequency of flooding on the Pemmon, right? Great example.
Absolutely, and even down in the Baker, right? We see these rain on storm events flooding out the fields down there, knowing the development that's there being impacted. It changes how we can use our land and how we should use our land. And it also, to speak more to like the Campton climate action plan, basically, that they have, it really does change the way we make decisions about everything and to be mindful of those moving forward.
So we have one question I want to go back to in the chat, and I don't know if anyone feels like they can respond to this, but Donald Toll said, who were the last human beings to actually be stewards of the environment?
We have
an answer in the crowd.
Yes. So for those of you who can only see the speakers, one of the students said Indigenous people. So I think, and as I, started us at the beginning, thinking about the Indigenous communities that were here long before the colonists, and thinking about how they care for these lands.
Autumn, you want to add something?
But to lend it to you, like you said, he's gonna try and hop on. He's gonna
Okay.
try and do it. And two, the indigenous people who used to have ownership of this land, we talk about them as if they don't exist anymore. These people are still existing right now. There are communities that still either practice their cultural heritage or they're folks that are living among us and they just have history. There are many initiatives that are working to either directly give the land back to the people who own the land, or to, if that isn't an option, at least share it better. Giving these people the opportunity, if they desire, to practice land ownership and land usage the way that they traditionally did. Which in most cases has better environmental impacts than the ones that we use for land. So using those resources, reaching out to those people, asking for forgiveness for the land that we've taken from them. And then eventually trying to come up with methods where we can work together with people.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, so there's a group that's kind of organized, started out with faculty at UNH that's called the Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective, and working, they work closely with the head speakers of the Kawasaki Band of the Penobscot, and they just put out a really amazing film that's called Swimming Upstream, and you can find it on INHCC's YouTube channel, that was initially made in kind of response to or sort of in preparation for the vote in Durham to remove the Mill Pond Dam. But the film, I think, lots of people have said had a real impact on how people voted for that and how it sort of really changed people's minds. And the film features Indigenous leaders and their both current and historic knowledge about tending those waterways and thinking about the estuary and the way that dam has had, that dam and so many others have impacted the health of the river. So as Autumn rightly points out, it's not just that they were stewards, but that they are stewards. And I think,
Quick pitch. Hi, I'm Gary McCool, a library faculty member here. This is my first year not being that. I'm still adjusting. So I retired at the end of last academic year after I'm here 43 years as a librarian here. So I had a little bit different color hair then. But especially for people who may not be able to attend or zoom in on the afternoon of this last session, I just wanted to make a pitch that Brian Eisenhower, who's currently, as many of you know, probably Brian will be on this afternoon panel, the latest one, is faculty advisor to the student group Common Ground. I hope there's some members of Common Ground that might be here. I was the faculty advisor when the group began in 1982 for about 35 years. But for people who don't know that or maybe new to PSU, Common Ground is the PSU's environmental and social justice student organization. There may be others that overlap with this subject area too, but that's someone on, a group on campus that focuses especially on the environment. You can get involved in. The other one in the community, I know that Doug McLean, and I see Jerry Beck, I don't know Jerry, but I know Doug, there is a PEMI Climate Emergency Coalition. You can just Google that. PEMI Climate Emergency Coalition, that is a local group focused very much on New Hampshire legislation that was mentioned and national legislation on the carbon tax rebate plan. There is both a regional organization, I think based out of Laconia, and a national organization that they're part of. So both of those groups, the one on campus and one in the community, which I'm sure they'll talk about in the afternoon, but I mean, for those who aren't able to be here, those would give you something to be involved with. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and have our sort of second half of this session come up. Thank you all for your comments. And I think we're gonna, so Len was gonna talk in the first half, but we'll fit him in here.
And Roxana is also on.
Yep.
Yep, is that a yep? Great.
Yes, I am on. Yeah.
There's more seats. There's 3 of you and 5 chairs, so. You can. Yeah, there you go. There's for you. Is someone online? Roxana Wright. Okay. And I'm gonna take one of these back because I've lost track. Yeah, let's see.
Yeah, I am. You're really high. I'm so high. I had to put mine down. Okay.
There's one right here. And one right here.
Yeah, I have no idea.
You're good? Okay. You don't have to stand if you don't want to. There are some chairs. Is this stable? Oh, yeah. For sure.
Saying hello.
Okay, okay. I was like, am I- all right. So I just sort of asked folks to introduce yourselves. I think we'll have Autumn go first. There's copies of the program on the table there.
Okay.
And we'll just sort of, we'll have Autumn go, and then maybe Len will have you go. Does that make sense? Sure. Okay, and then we'll go in this order. The rest, we'll just sort of slot Len in between Autumn and Roxana.
Cool. So my name's Autumn Heil. I'm a student here. I'm an IDS major into interdisciplinary studies, environmental science and biology and fine art. So today as part of this, we're doing the resources and adaptations section. I wanted to talk a little bit about my interest in art and how I also combine it with my interest in the sciences. There's a new and emerging sort of field, probably the past 20 years, called earth art or climate art, which is art that is directly focused around representing what is happening in the climate right now. This can be any medium, so photography, printmaking, you name it, anything is included in this. Think about things like the pictures of the polar bears that you've seen, like the photography, that's included in this. There's, well, I'll get into it, but so the importance of using art as a representation of climate change is that there's sometimes, as we were talking about in this discussion today, there's usually this disconnect between the science of climate change or the big picture things that we don't get to see on a daily basis in New Hampshire, the things that are happening around the world, this disconnect between that and the viewer. And so what art can do is bring that information into a more visual form that is more engaging, can connect with the viewer, and potentially get an emotional response that will cause you to change your behavior or look into it further, or connect with more people. It reduces these big, non-tangible sort of ideas that we think about, we get bogged down by, into a single image. And kind of like I said before, this can be anything. And a lot of them are engaging and beautiful, and it's from people around the world. The way that, because I also work with scientific reports as well as fine art, when I look at these forms of data, it's often very hard to look at these. They're not meant for people to read necessarily who are outside of the sciences. So if we put those visuals either into the reports themselves or provide them in a way that the viewer can readily access them, it kind of breaks it down and makes it easier for us to understand. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, as an artist, knowing where your resources are coming from, who's making them, what they're made out of, where you're purchasing them from, is a great way to be a little bit more sustainable in terms of the art that you're making. So this is buying from sustainable or reputable sources as best as you can, because I know that it's hard as students, or if you're minimum wage or something like that, it's hard to find the people that are making things sustainably and save money in the process, basically. Recycling old materials and recycling your old art is also a great way to continue that sort of process of not using as many materials when you're trying to make this impact. Thrifting, one of my favorite things to do, getting more materials. I especially do this for textiles, reusing clothing, stuff like that. Another thing that I've more recently become aware of is the amount of water that I'm using when I'm making art. Printmaking and silkscreen is water intensive. Things that you need to wash out or clean and stuff like that. So just generally being more aware. And I think I said this before, but just do the best you can with these things. It's not something that we're going to be able to get down perfect. It's being aware, it's being conscious, and teaching other people about how to be more sustainable when they're making art. So those two things combined, as artists, we have potential to make a huge impact on how people view climate change, besides the way that we can just present it verbally or with reports and data, which I think is, I mean, it's beautiful, it's critical to the way that we create as people. So yeah.
So I think we'll go ahead. Len, do you want to go ahead and unmute?
Okay, yeah. Can you hear me?
Let's see. How do we think about this?
Can you hear me?
It's coming from here.
Is it coming from
Yeah.
here? Where did we put the?
Is there? Can people hear me?
Yep.
Yes. All right. Look at this technology.
Okay. First of all, I want to apologize. Thank you, Autumn, for inviting me to this, and I'm sorry that I showed up after my session was over already. What I wanted to offer in the last session are a few little anecdotes about how climate change in particular is affecting natural systems and certain species in our backyard. So in general, one thing that has a scientific community concerned, ecologists in particular, is a phenomenon referred to as phenological mismatch. And I don't know if anybody brought that up in the last session. Was that mentioned?
No, no.
Okay, so what that means is that with spring starting earlier, that can then induce the plants to go into bud earlier than they would normally or have for centuries and millennia. And that can, in turn, sort of create this this problem with the scheduling of how nature proceeds coming out of winter. So when the insects come back, they need to be able to forage on the freshest and newest materials, plant materials. And if that has happened earlier than they pupate or come out of their own winter estivation, then that in turn is going to have a cascading effect on the critters that eat the insects. And so we've already documented many instances where the earlier spring is having consequences for food availability for all those animals that are on up the food chain, from plants on up to the primary consumers and the secondary consumers. So that's a general phenomenon. Now, with regards to some specifics in our own backyard, there was a lot of attention given to the Bicknell's thrush at Plymouth State a few years back. Thanks a lot to Marianne McGarry and some others. And the problem with the Bicknell's thrush is that they are a high elevation breeding specialist. So they only breed in the mountain ranges around here at elevations above 2,700 feet. But what's happening with climate change is that specialized zone at the tops of a lot of the mountains around here, that spruce fir thicket that's at the top, is
So.
That's a good space. Very contemplative.
He'll come back.
He's got spotty Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Can you hear me again?
Yes, yes.
But the problem is the Bignell thrush is, it really should be threatened in the state of New Hampshire. It is threatened in Vermont. Its total species population is quite small. And we suspect that 85% of the entire species population overwinters on the Dominican Republic or on Hispaniola. And of course, half of that is deforested. Most of Haiti is deforested. And then the third little anecdote I wanted to share is there's another species along the coast, the New England coast, called the salt marsh sparrow. And it also is a specialist in that it breeds in salt marshes. What's happening with the salt marshes is the interval between the two highest tides during their peak breeding season is getting shorter. And the number of tides that exceed a certain threshold and that end up inundating their breeding activities is causing wholesale failure for them to produce any young in certain springs and summer, whereby the highest tide actually comes up over the dunes and floods their breeding grounds and kills every single one of the nestlings. So this is a species that's now considered to be endangered. There is a research consortium that's working across all of the New England coastal states, trying to quantify and document the problem with this species. And so these are just a few anecdotes, examples of how climate change is actually negatively impacting natural systems in our area. I'll also say that another thing that's happening is range expansion, where species that formerly, even just 20 years ago, occurred only south of us latitudinally are now creeping up. For me personally, I'm not too upset about that because now in my backyard, I see red-bellied woodpeckers and tufted titmice, cardinals. These are all Carolina wrens. These are all species that have moved up northerly as the winters have, and well, as all seasons have become warmer and warmer. So if we can chat about that later, that's fine.
Thanks, Len. I think we'll go ahead with Roxana. We'll stay on the screen here.
Yep. Yeah, I'm here.
Great.
All right. Well, I'm going to share the screen because I kind of took advantage of being in Zoom so I could share with you a very brief sort of PowerPoint presentation. I'm only going to take about 5 minutes. So hang on one second. I'm just going to get it going. Yes. So shifting gear a little bit because this session is focused on responses and adaptations and noticing some very interesting conversations happening in the chat and some talks about what businesses are doing and kind of what's their responsibility in all this. So we're just going to take this economic and business development perspectives. And I wanted to start by showing you how New Hampshire compare with the rest of the states in terms of how outdoor recreation brings value to the state. So the darker the blue that you are seeing, the more the outdoor recreation economy contributes to the value in the state. So obviously in the White Mountains, we have quite a lot of outdoor recreation. So obviously economic and business responses to adaptations to climate change are important to our state. The outdoor recreation economy is all the money that is made and spent around activities that take place in nature. And just from what Jack was describing, that tends to be more and more challenging for companies to kind of create value and more challenging for consumers to kind of come and take advantage of the beauty of the nature. But first of all, just a little perspective here on how much the outdoor recreation generates for our state. And as you can see there, it generates billions in consumer spending annually, direct jobs, again, billions in wages and salaries, and hundreds of millions in state and local tax revenue. So I'm going to kind of shift gears from that a little bit And I'm going to show everyone a survey that was only published today, so very timely. And executives of major companies, so this was a global survey, were asked, when did sustainability become a main priority for your company? And you notice the pink, so that's the majority of the responses. They indicated 2 to 4 years ago, but I also kind of stood back and took that in when I saw the over 10 years ago, right, the green on our screen. So this is something that obviously organizations have been aware of for a long time. And I know there are so many calls to actions in the presentations today. And this kind of ties to that. The executives, again, were asked, what are the main barriers in advancing your sustainability agenda? And notice culture changes. This is why an event like today brings awareness, brings conversations, gets us to discuss this with the younger generations, with the young professionals coming into their professional sort of roles, and how the culture needs to change a little bit around it. So going back to our state and particularly to New Hampshire, Jack was telling us about our skiing resorts, our Waterville Valley, and he was describing how the ski mountains are kind of struggling to address some of the challenges brought on by climate change. And then Autumn was discussing how we individually need to take steps towards sustainability. And here we see just a few examples. So this is Adaptations, their commitment to zero. Cranmore Mountain taking some commitment for sustainability in terms of snowmaking technology, grooming investments, electric charges and heat pumps, and LED lighting. Also in the same vein, right, because we all in New Hampshire and we know how much value our ski mountains bring to the state and to the White Mountains. Here we see the Forever Project from Loon Mountain, very nice presentation that they do online. I recommend you go and explore that if you'd like. And then we see Waterville Valley, right? Just what Jack was talking about, this idea of building more sustainable slopes at using water resources in more conservative ways and other ways of conserving energy, waste management and recycling. And Waterville is also partnering with other organizations and institutions in our state to make it happen. So as we can see here, obviously the ski resort is such a big part of our economy here in the White Mountains, and we see some efforts towards sustainability. My purpose is just to inform us, it's not to review their efforts or make any commentary on that. There are also a few of many sustainable businesses in the White Mountains that we see here. I'm sure we've all seen the Pete and Jerry's eggs, that was supermarket, and they are right at the foothills of the White Mountains, the same as the Grand Hotel in Whitefield that has taken a pledge towards sustainability. So I would like us to kind of just end this discussion on business and economic development just with a call for action, the fact that each of us can be a change agent, and to kind of give you a perspective that economic and business sustainable development means not just caring for the environment, but also caring for people. And I would just like to very quickly introduce you. I'm sure some of you are already aware of this. These are the global sustainable development goals that are going to shape economies, subnational and national alike, business actions in the next decades. And we notice climate action, life below water. We definitely see a commitment there towards life on land and what that means, but also the idea of reducing poverty to zero hunger, good health and well-being. So I'm just going to stop here, and I hope you enjoy kind of this different perspective. And I know I am learning a lot from all the other talks. Thank you.
For those of you that are standing by the door, there are at least 2 chairs that I can see, 3 chairs, and this settee here. If you want to make your way in, please come in and sit down. There's still seats. Don't be shy. Okay.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Suzanne Gaulocher. I'm a professor in public health. Public health is across the bridge on the Holderness side of campus. And I really, I think, want to talk about human health and environmental health at the same time. So these intersections of these disciplines, you know, when we think about climate change, we think about environment, although climate change, climate crisis is having big impact on the health of humans and other earthlings. And it's really impossible to solve problems of health equity without thinking about environmental equity and justice. And so really kind of pivoting toward a more systems level way of thinking about these issues and solutions. So a couple points that I wanted to make about health, human health and environmental health is that it is the biggest, climate change is the biggest threat to human health right now that's facing human health. And I was a little bit late too, but I heard folks talking about climate refugees. And as the Earth's climate is changing, people are going to be moving around, but there's a difference between people that have to relocate and migrate and people that can, because they're hot and they want to go somewhere cooler. And so we're going to start to see a disparity between rich and poor. And that is sometimes referred to as climate apartheid. So that people that have the resources are going to be moving north. I was recently, I'm a part of a group called New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate Action, and I chair the subgroup for social justice. And we had a speaker come in by the name of Caleb Dresser. He's a doctor at Harvard and MD, and he's specifically looking at human migration. And he showed a map, which I would share with you if you're interested, of the United States in the next 5 decades and how Americans are going to be migrating. And guess where they're all going to want to go? New Hampshire, Wisconsin, Minnesota. People are going to be heading up north, and those are going to be because as we're warming, it's going to be cooler. So as it's affecting skiing, it's also going to mean that people in southern parts of this country are going to be suffering. So in New Hampshire, we think about winter a lot, but what is happening in summer? It's getting hotter, and who's going to be the people at risk? It's a lot of folks that are elders or poor. And if we think about what's happening, people are dying because they're hot and people aren't connected to each other as much as we could be. And so there's a lack of social network, social connection. So people aren't being checked in on. You might think that a solution to that problem is fans or cooling, but fans are, if not the biggest, and I know that there are people in here that may know the answer to this more than me, but fans are a huge contributor to electricity consumption. And electricity consumption is one of the biggest problems causing climate change. So what do we do when we have a big subset of our population just in New Hampshire that are facing health impact because of extreme heat, and yet a fan, which might be a solution, is actually not? So thinking about protocols or standards for green roofs and how do we cool homes or even building new homes. And so really thinking about that and the difference between people that are migrating and people that have to migrate. So I don't know how much more time I have, but a couple.
All these things, I forgot to start the time.
A couple of other big points that I want to make about the intersection between health and the environment is people have talked about animals and insects, but insect incubation periods are going to increase, which is not good when it comes to mosquito larvae incubation periods or any kind of insect that's giving diseases to humans like dengue or malaria. And so with even 1 or 2 degrees of warming, you're going to increase mosquito larva incubation periods by weeks on either side of the season, which is going to increase rates of malaria and dengue. And that is deadly. And so really thinking about how the human health is impacted by that animals. So, you know, even schistosomiasis, which is a snail that is in water that gets into our bodies and it's very dangerous. A couple other, and then a threat to human rights. And so we have declarations or even sometimes laws and policies that protect human rights, which have the potential, high potential to be compromised as we're moving into these crises. And that is just going to continue to perpetuate the inequities that poor folks who are already receiving the greater burden of the cause of climate change. And I want to, oh, and then I loved the question about what can we do? And I was thinking about this because, and I think something that I don't know, I hesitate a little bit to mention, and that's that sometimes we may have to sacrifice. So for me, and again, I was a little bit late, so I don't know if this got mentioned, but Roxana showed the picture with eggs. So really being informed and aware of where your food comes from, eating less, full stop, eating less meat sometimes. Dairy, we think of meat, but dairy is just as bad. And I love dairy, love cheese. But just thinking about being informed and being aware, but even though those are small things, there are things we can do right now. And that would be a message that, you know, it's interesting. I have a child, I'm a mother to a child who's 20 and who's very much interested in having pleasure in life. And in as much as I love pleasure, it's also important to think about what we have to do, that we do have to make sacrifices in order to address this, because it's really important. I don't know, but I didn't want to end with a doomy gloomy type thing, but I'm going to stop because I suspect that I went over 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Filiz, Ruhm, political science faculty, and advisor to Model UN. It will come to that. And when I was putting things together for this talk and came to this room thinking there will be maybe 10 people. And I am such a pessimist and when it comes to many things. And I saw, oh God, there are so many people. So, okay, I'll be optimist for a while, but it won't last long, I promise. It's not in me, I guess. And we were talking about culture changes happening, and when it comes to climate change, and I think it is the most important problem we have, not fast enough. I'm already pessimist. So I apologize if I am not focusing on local that much. I am a globalist, and my career started as a very security-focused person in a traditionalist sense, but now I look at security as a holistically and bigger way, and definitely climate change fits into that. Oh, okay, I'll accept that I have bias because I'm a political scientist, but whatever we discuss related to climate change, politics is in the middle of it. So you want to talk about food security, gender inequality, climate refugees, and water, human rights, health, diseases. You have to be informed citizens. Facts matter in this area, especially. And it is unbelievable as a political scientist that climate change is such a polarizing issue right now. Can you imagine 30 years ago, it was quite bipolar. It wasn't bipartisan this way. What happened? Why? And let me tell you why. It started with elite. Elite gives you the information. And so question the information provided to you. Advocacy matters, informed citizenry matters, facts matters. So thinking about, again, a couple of quick things. Again, I'm mumbling because I put a lot of information down. We are discussing, like, no, I can pass. For this one, I even look at the definition of political science and went even to Wikipedia. For the greater good of the citizens, political science is all about 2,500 years further. But the concern I am having, and political science and related to this one, is inequalities. How climate change has already been exacerbating existing inequalities and creating new ones. It is affecting migration patterns. It is going to affect even more. Internationally, globally, we are talking about some high numbers, as I was saying, might be even 1 billion people. Right now, we have 84 million internally displaced people and refugees. I'm not saying all of them are climate refugees, but even when you look at very typical conflict, there is a climate component to it. So we quite often ignoring. And in the national and subnational levels, again, disadvantaged communities are disproportionately affected by this, by climate change, and will continue to do so. Global North, we still focus on mitigating, which is fine, but it is not fast enough for the Global South who needs to deal with the adaptation. Move on to that aspect of it. What do we know? I was looking at some quotes. Former President Obama's science advisor said, we are not really in business any longer of trying to avoid dangerous climate change. We are already in dangerous climate change. We are trying to avoid catastrophic climate change. Then in 2016, his successor took away, and we went backwards to a certain extent. So how do we achieve equitable forms of how do we get that equitable forms of adaptation? Keep also in mind that Global South was not as responsible as us looking at the crisis we are at. Their footprints are smaller, but they are dealing with the burdens of it way more. And if we want to adapt, we want to deal with the severe effects of the climate change to a certain extent, we can still afford it. They cannot. Are we willing to share our technologies with them? Not really. In some way, at this point in our comfortable lives, and I love that references to how we consume, I think that's the problem. Who are we to tell them, don't live like us? When we are in our giant SUVs individually driving around and tell them, don't you dare. So it is hot here, we want our ACs, but don't you dare have your own. So what is the equitable solutions, or how? I think we need to look at the big picture. We take steps, and absolutely we need to take steps in local solutions, but quite often, and problem is global, and quite often decisions are made globally that affects the locals, and locals don't have the voice. How do we bring their voices nationally, and for those disadvantaged people's voices to the equation? I think it is absolutely essential. Some of the things, one quick example is, who do these natural resources belong to? Maybe you heard people talk about Amazons being the lungs of the earth. How dare you, Brazil or Brazilians are cutting the Amazon? They should not do that. It belongs to us too, isn't it? But why are they doing that? So we need to look at the reasoning. It might be their only alternatives. It's not just criticizing them with their actions is incredibly hypocritical of us. And so that's one side. Again, I might be jumping from all over, and I apologize for that. This has been one of those days. But going back to what we need to do, and teacher side of me and Model UN advisor side of me kicks in. Quite often, we tell our students to these data, we show even documentaries and all. Sometimes it clicks, sometimes they get scared, but not that often. I think simulations matter. That's why Model UN is so dear to me. Let them be that Brazilian farmer and telling their stories for a day, for 2 days, for 3 days. And that is why it is cliche, but we need to, as teachers, create environments that students can actually participate, building policies, and while putting themselves into the shoes of those disadvantaged people. That's why Model UN, or PSU Model UN is organizing a high school conference this year, UNHCR. We are looking at durable solutions to refugee problems and climate change and refugee problems. Let them discuss it. So that is my 2 cents. It's for high schools, but I'm more and more thinking about maybe you can participate in it. Come have fun with us. I will stop.
Thank you. So I know that we are starting to run low on time for this session and that folks have other commitments, but I want to give us a little bit of time to have a few questions. Someone online had asked how many were in the in-person audience. I think I counted 50. I think that's about where we are. So we're sort of 50 online and about 45 on Zoom. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess Will and I have a question here just about, we see, both through their economic system, but our political systems as well, a lot of failures and sort of inability to adjust. So I guess the question is, do you think our current political and economic systems are flexible enough to fix these challenges?
Not yet. If we do not act, that is why I start with informed citizenry and advocacy matters. And it is on you. And it is, if we start this with you, we are too late. That's why we got to start with elementary school, middle schools, as young or at the home. But you need to act. You need to participate. We created these systems. They are artificial. We can change them again. But we need you participating. That's why I'm trying to be optimistic, because when you are pessimist, you can't do anything. So it is possible, but we have a long way to go, and it really depends on you guys.
I want to add, think about the backlash to the Green New Deal, and that wasn't even ambitious enough. And so I would answer no. And I feel like I understand why young people don't believe voting matters. I really think that there's ways that, and it does, and at the same time, so does other ways of thinking about how change happens. Mm-hmm. But I feel that politically, the level of change that's needed, and then the polarization of our political system, it's something radical is going to have to happen for it to be effective or make a difference.
Yeah, I'll just add, your voting will hurt us if you are not informed. And that's what we are dealing with. People are, I don't know which one is worse. That is why it is, yeah, don't vote. It's horrible.
Right,
Please
unless
don't
you vote
get
for
me.
the.
Yeah, but if you are not informed, then you vote. Because when social media revolution were happening, we were all excited. We will get the information, we will vote accordingly. It will be a democratization globally. Guess what? Not really. That is why please research, please find and then vote. Don't just go there and vote. Sorry, I can pass some stuff there.
Miles, you want to?
Yeah, this is directly related. It could be, but I think that as a society, especially our generation, where like we're thinking about projections into the future, they're talking about 2050. Right, we're going to be the people in charge at that point. And something that I think is really important to consider, especially when you're talking about environmental health and justice, there are two things. One is that we as a society need to start to figure out how to show compassion to everybody, no matter where they're from. People are going to be moving in numbers that we cannot fathom in terms of like, if they moved into our community today. We need to start to think about how we can show compassion to those people, not just how are we going to logistically make them all fit. That is part of it too. Yeah. But I think that that's something we have to put a lot of emphasis on. That is a piece of this. And we as a society, all of us together, need to figure out how to do that. Just because humanity needs to grow up. It's not about countries individually, it's not about nations individually. This is a globalizing event where we need to all fix this together. And it doesn't matter where you're from. It matters that we're all addressing this problem and making sure that everybody has the power to address this problem. Because the other thing that I wanted to say was that as we move further into these times when events are going to get worse, one of the major things with climate change is that the small hurricanes are going to be bigger and the small floods are going to be bigger. They're going to affect more people, but also they're going to affect the people who are most disadvantaged most, which is what you guys were talking about. When that happens, it's going to be even harder to get those people out of poverty. It's going to be even harder to make sure that they have the social safety net that they need in order to survive. And so if we as a society can lift up as many people as we possibly can today and soon, it will be that much easier to make sure that nobody's having there aren't groups of people who are just basically being destroyed.
I would like to add, it definitely compassion and absolutely necessary, but I think we need to start moving away from the dangerous side of nationalism. When we start, I think it starts with seeing each other as human, because if we don't get that, when it comes to our resources and how we use, we pick and choose, and it creates inefficiencies. I think in order to get to the point of compassion, we need to see each other as human beings, plain and simple. The other thing I want to add related to politics of it, we vote based on the short-term consequences, what will happen. We refuse, we do not have the patience or the vision. If the investment is long-term and we do not see the effects next year, it is a loss. So we do not vote accordingly. So I don't know what is the solution, this narrow mindset, short-term decisions. I think that's also a big problem for us.
So I know that we sort of scheduled a session to end at 2. So I want to sort of respect that. We'll reconvene at 2:30. We'll be thinking more about, increasingly more about